Today we're going to put everybody a little bit to work. It may feel a little bit like you're back in college, working in different working groups, but hoping to make it more interactive, more discussion-based to collectively produce something, bring all these great minds together. So to that point, yesterday we heard a lot about all the different great things that tokenization can do. All the big market sizes, the big value that it can unlock. Tokenizing assets can provide better liquidity, can provide access to new types of products for investors, can drive operational efficiency, can transform financial services. And we've heard a lot about the different projects and things that folks are working across the industry, right? Some market surveys out there have been done, right? We've seen market sizing ranging from 2 trillion to 30 trillion. You take an average over there. We've seen different stats around, people have hypothesized 5.5% to 10% roughly of assets in circulation being tokenized by 2030. Point is, large opportunity to unlock across funds, securities, and cash. We at EY as well have done some institutional investor surveys on an annual basis, and we've seen there's a level of demand, right? Institutional investors see the value of being able to settle securities, settle funds instantly. They see the value of being able to participate in funds in smaller ticket sizes. And on the buy side, we see asset managers seeing that investor demand, seeing the opportunities they could unlock, and wanting to get involved in this space from tokenizing funds, tokenizing assets, and really using blockchain to unearth some of these use cases. However, there's a lot of challenges that exist out there to scaling this and really making this a reality in financial services, right? At a high level, right, to start off, there's currently right now limited or not a large amount of distribution venues or ability to reach tokenized assets into the hand of investors. There's also not a lot of areas to get liquidity if you want to enable secondary trading. One of the things people often talk about with tokenized assets is you could take securities, put them on a platform, and enable secondary trading, but there aren't really a lot of platforms out there to support that. There isn't a lot of liquidity yet. There isn't a lot of compliance around how you can onboard investors and traders to trade those securities. So a lot of big ideas, big challenge right off the bat on getting people to actually, A, firms distribute these tokenized assets, but B, also supporting liquidity and trading. There's also a limited but certainly growing number of enterprise-grade infrastructure providers and different capability providers to support tokenized assets. Right, if we want to see tokenized assets at scale, we need digital transfer agencies, asset servicers, node providers, tokenization engines, all these different infrastructure and service providers to support the asset issuance, to support the asset lifecycle, to support a tokenized fund if it lives on a blockchain. There's also often, one of the big pushbacks we get is there's high cost to implement this infrastructure. Many firms, we've seen examples in the industry today, asset managers and banks and firms running things in parallel. So they might be launching a fund that's tokenized, using traditional books and records, traditional transfer agencies, but then also using blockchain. And then the question from leadership is that doesn't make sense to kind of double the cost. When are we going to see a value return? What is going to be the value or the return on investment? When will that happen? Maybe it doesn't make sense to get started now because it's too expensive. And another big area that we often get is there's a lack of platform and or token standardization leading to lack of interoperability, right? Sometimes, if a bank wants to issue a bond, an asset manager wants to issue a fund, a service provider wants to serve, one chain, all these different things are happening in silos, and then you're almost defeating the purpose of blockchain and creating different silos of liquidity, and you're not actually realizing some of the big benefits. And so there needs to come together with some level of token standards, some level of platform standardization to support this level of interoperability across asset classes, across funds, across jurisdictions to really support the potentials of tokenization. And lastly, there's a bit of an unclear but still evolving, depending on where you are in the globe, when it comes to the regulatory environment. Some countries are a bit more forward with putting out frameworks. I know in the US that there's still open questions around how tokenized securities are treated. We've seen some examples of some tokenized products being approved, but there hasn't been a framework to actually encourage organizations to really move forward in this area. So what we've done is, from talking with various participants around the ecosystem, from meeting with banks and issuers and service providers, we really come to the conclusion that there's this concept we've come up with around a minimum viable ecosystem. And that's what we'll spend the next 30 minutes breaking out and talking through. The way we define a minimum viable ecosystem is a collection of different industry participants across the tokenized asset lifecycle to support asset issuance, tokenization and minting and burning, the distribution of these assets, the servicing of these assets, and the trading of these assets. And we believe until these different participants really come together, build out their capabilities, work with each other, and see how they fit within this broader ecosystem, we won't see RWAs scale across financial services at a level that's impactful to what all these market sizes and all the great stuff that we hear people talk about it on. So who are these participants in a tokenized minimum viable ecosystem, right? We've broken it out over here into roughly 6 or 7 groups. I know we'll break out the groups into 5. We've collapsed a few for the purpose of this exercise, but we broadly see, right off the bat, you need security or asset issuers. You need institutions, banks, corporates, asset managers, different companies that are actually interested in issuing their assets or issuing their securities on blockchain. Right off the bat, you need the supply. You need tokenization engines to support that interest, right? It's many companies, corporates, banks, asset managers, they may not be, or it may not make sense for them to build the capabilities themselves to tokenize these assets. So there needs to be an ecosystem of providers to support the minting and burning, the green listing and red listing, kind of the contract management, and just the overall process of issuing these tokens. If these assets are issued in the form of a fund, you need asset servicers and transfer agents to play those roles, right? And right now, in the regulated fund space, there needs to be a transfer agency. There needs to be participants to support the asset servicing of these funds that support capital calls, reporting, dividend distribution, all the different not so fun stuff that happens behind the scenes once a fund's launched. And so those providers are needed to support the record keeping, the transfer of ownership, the proof of ownership, and really help service those assets. One may argue, can't the blockchain play that role? Certainly can, right? A blockchain is by definition a record keeper, but in the regulatory landscape for regulated products, there may be a desire to still have a third party or a provider to support or validate some of those ownerships. You'll then need distribution platforms and secondary markets, right? You've got your asset, you've got your issuers issuing these securities, issuing these funds. How do you get them in the hand of investors, whether they're institutional investors, retail investors, accredited investors? What's the correct way to get these assets into the hands of investors or into the hands of people who are interested in acquiring them? Many of us over here may have traditional wealth accounts, fintech accounts, broker-dealer accounts where we buy funds, stocks, bonds from. Do you change that investor-customer experience by going a direct-to-consumer? Do you require people to sign up to a platform to participate? Do you keep the similar customer experience and you distribute through your traditional wires, your regionals, your broker-dealers, and your fintechs? How does that landscape evolve? Maybe it's all three, but I think that's an area where we still need to solve for to actually, you've got this big supply, but how do you get the supply into the hands of the demand? On the custodian side, right, we couple custodians with asset servicers. You're going to need, especially in the fund space, qualified custodians to custody the underlying assets of those funds. So if it's a tokenized money market fund, who's custodying those underlying treasuries? A tokenized alternative, a tokenized mutual fund, who's actually proving that those assets exist in the real world and not just on chain. And CSDs also will play a role with, especially on the bonds and security side. We've seen a lot of activity with some of the CSDs in Europe, actually building these tokenization platforms, supporting these bond issuances, supporting the record keeping. So we still live in a world where a lot of securities need to be issued and recorded with the CSDs, and so they'll play an important role as well. And then lastly, infrastructure and data service providers. So these are new providers that are going to need to support providing data on chain, validating transactions, node stand-up, monitoring blockchain health, supporting AML KYC, supporting privacy, supporting identity. These are a whole slew of new providers that are going to need to provide services to this on-chain ecosystem to really make all this work. So what we've done here is we've broken out, and you'll see different 5 easels across the room, right, into tokenization engines, transfer agents and asset servicers, distribution platforms and secondary markets, infra and data service providers, and then the asset and security issuers. So we've got 5 wonderful facilitators who will be leading those discussions. If everyone wants to raise their hand, the 5 facilitators, Dave, there we go, we've got everybody across the board. So What we ask for you is to, some of you may have self-selected and signed up into groups last night or through the emails that went out. If not, no worries, feel free to join whichever group you'd like. Feel free to float around. But the task here is, what does your group that you're going to be working in, what are some of the challenges that you see, and what are some of the opportunities that you see to support the build out of a minimum viable ecosystem to support at scale RWAs across financial services? Any questions or comments before we break out? Hopefully everyone's excited. And we'll have wonderful note takers as well from the Centrifuge team, so no need to worry about taking notes or building any slides. We're not back in college. But what we'll ask everybody to do throughout their 20 minutes is have a good discussion. The note takers assigned to each group will be taking notes. The facilitators will lead the dialogue. And then we'll ask wonderful representatives from each of the 5 groups to spend 2-3 minutes to do a quick readout at the end, and we can have a good open discussion.
We could have just called today and said, well, we need all of your groups to be good at what you do, and now we have an interest for, asset tokenization. But we tried to go a little bit more philosophical with it, right? We actually had some asset issuers, some token issuers at the table to go through some of the challenges that they faced. And if we go to the challenges slide, ultimately we saw that there was a big concern around liquidity. There is a big concept of tapping into on-chain crypto capital, right? There is really 2 ways of raising money, from convincing the RWA or TradFi traditional investors to invest in a token, or to tap into crypto natives, right? Whether they be organizations like DAOs, foundations, stablecoins, or whether it's crypto retail, DeFi ecosystems. And so being able as a asset issuer to tap into that, we found that there needs to be a solution to help either educate the crypto market on how RWAs will help the DeFi scene, because one of the big takeaways was, especially the older they get, the more traditional the investors are, the more rooted they are, the more challenging it is to convince them to go on-chain, whereas on-chain money tends to want to stay on-chain, and so we need this education around what RWAs can benefit from to the DeFi ecosystem. And so there's even, we think, a lack of vision around defaults to explain that. There's all different types of asset classes that we can tokenize and leverage for DeFi. The problem is crypto natives, they're already familiar with the crypto asset profile. It's really typically in either extreme risk reward structure, or in the case of stablecoins and T-bills, no risk whatsoever. But explaining, if we go down the risk curve of different assets that we can tokenize and leverage for DeFi, there is a clear lack of understanding and standards that we can follow for the DeFi industry to actually start to support RWAs. So I guess we can jump to the opportunity slide now, which is really what are we trying to do, is how do we bridge DeFi to fully understand and endorse RWAs, not just upgrade TradFi systems. We think there is a massive UX problem that I think you won't get a lot of arguments around. Being in the crypto industry, we need to solve for that in order to be able to onboard RWAs. And naturally, we'll be looking very forward to the venues and the distribution agents about their solutions, because ultimately what was a roadblock for one of our security issuers was this lack of liquidity to be able to tap into. The tokenization engines are there, the interest, the philosophy of why RWAs should be on chain is there, but there is a disconnect to tapping into DeFi and on-chain capital, and that's what we think is the opportunity to encourage more asset tokenization and more proper security issuers. So hopefully you all agree and understand. We'd love your feedback as well, but thank you for your time and looking forward to hearing everyone else's conclusions.
All right, hi everybody. Yeah, we had a great discussion on tokenization engines and what can we do as an ecosystem to move forward. We spent quite a bit of time initially talking about what are actually tokenization engines and kind of identifying the problem that tokenization is a very broad term in this industry and a lot of people have very different interpretations of it, which creates problems for adoption because it's hard for people to understand who are we working with, who are the right partners to build on, and how are we building this together. So starting to like segment that and starting to define more specifically what that means is kind of an important next step. If we go to the challenges slide, if we skip one more. So yeah, understanding of tokenization engines, understanding of the term is important. More broadly, there's a lack of understanding of the tokenization market at large and what the technology providers can provide. Some users tend to believe that it's a very different regulatory landscape, which I think some of the technology engines in the table were identifying as a problem, because ultimately, if you're launching a tokenized asset, a lot of the similar problems or a lot of the similar requirements that you have in launching an asset in the current traditional financial markets still apply. And you still need licenses and all of the legal structure that is involved with that. Beyond that, we talked quite a bit about standardization, actually, both in terms of data as well as in terms of the tokenization process itself. So in terms of tokenization, there's quite a few different standards out there today. There were 2 different representations at the table. And an important problem, of course, with standardization is how do you start to agree on one standard and how do you start to use and the benefits of that by aligning as an industry on one. And then in terms of data, we talked about proof of reserves and oracles. I think there was a different table that I'm sure has much deeper ideas. But what we talked a little bit about is for a lot of these tokenized assets, there's much more comprehensive data going much beyond just how much USD is held in some bank accounts. And how do we start bringing that on chain? How do we start enabling investors in the space to utilize that data is an important problem. And then finally, and I think that comes to the next slide as well, is distribution into DeFi. It was really nice to see the previous table also identify this. One of the main things we're all trying to work towards is how do we bring new capital sources into these assets? How do we start utilizing the composability of DeFi, what we call money Legos, and what can tokenization engines do to enable that? How can we start building these DeFi integrations, and what are the problems there to solve? I think that's a topic that we need to spend a lot more time talking about, and it's still very, very early. We need to acknowledge that. So yeah, I think it was a great discussion, and a lot more to figure out together.
Hey everyone, I'm Dave Hendricks. I am the CEO and founder of Vertalo. I'd like to welcome you to day 2 of the Tokenized Transfer Agency Conference. I was tasked with being the facilitator of the transfer agents and asset servicers table. I posed 3 questions to the group. We almost didn't talk about challenges because the first challenge with transfer agency is, next slide. Do I have control over this? What the heck is a transfer agent? This is probably the least understood kind of like backwater basement operation in finance. It was established via SEC 34. So clearly it was important for investor protection, which is what SEC 33 and 34 really were about. How did the participants in this outstanding table here, how did they define a transfer agent? And we didn't get into asset servicers because we had like 3 minutes for this whole table to answer these deep existential questions. So basically, I will paraphrase what they said, dirty rent-seeking third parties that charge you to move your assets between you and the person that's buying it. Sometimes under onerous regulations by faceless bureaucrats in office buildings, in the regime's headquarters. That's not really what they said, but that's just how I read that. A middleman or middle person, excuse me, who decides who gets to transfer to whom. Okay, better play by the rules. Or und verifier, okay, of all proper data. okay? Who decides what is truth? So that's those are the definitions. Now, if you go to I'll share some really boring old stuff. It's like all photocopied on the SEC website, and it's like this long about what the heck a transfer agent is. Literally, the SEC themselves has no idea what a transfer agent does, and getting a transfer agent registration is actually, and this is factually true. I'm going to do a Joe Biden whisper. It's easier to get a TA registration than it is to get a barbershop license. And that's absolutely true. It is the easiest thing ever to get. You literally file a piece of paper, and it's like, yeah, I'm a transfer agent. Boom. Okay, and then no one understands what the hell you do. So the next question after that, do I have 20 more minutes? I'm just checking. Okay, no, I don't. Oh, no, don't try to pull me. I'm not going to, no, don't take my mic away. We had 3 minutes at this table. Next thing, next question. Next slide. Doink. Okay, so now that you understand or you have no idea what a transfer agent does and why you need to use them, are they relevant for your business? Okay, like what role would a transfer agent play in what you do in real world assets, whatever those are? Well, maybe help to keep records, because you gotta, like, what happened, like how much did someone pay? How about sending out confirms, like receipts, something that was done, okay? Or maybe the enforcement, making sure that a transfer actually occurred. Okay, so if you understand what a transfer agent is, like, what would you use it for? Well, you'd use it for these things. Okay, we're really going with a really narrow definition of transfer agent. Okay, so then ask one more question, because usually you do this kind of math proof. You have to have this like kind of third question. Okay, well, what's the third question? Okay. Who all saw Meltem versus Robert yesterday? Like, did you all see that? Okay, off your phones. Come on, get up. Come on, face up. Look me in the eyes. Okay, how many of you all saw this? I'm watching you, by the way. I see you people with your dopamine devices. If you saw that, next slide, boom. Do you think that RWA is crypto? If you think RWA is crypto and you think that crypto doesn't need transfer agents, then do you need a transfer agent? Or if you think that crypto, like, you have no idea what crypto means, okay? Don't know, like, what is the definition of crypto? What's the definition of RWA? If RWA is a different kind of, like a boring crypto, okay, or institutional crypto, do you think that if you're RWA and you're not crypto, do you need something like a transfer agent in order to run your business in an orderly fashion? Does it provide value for you? Okay. Does it change with tokenized RWAs? In this 30-second facilitation session that we had over there in the corner, we couldn't get into these meaty concepts. So what I decided to do is I'm going to host a Zoom call so you guys can find out about more stuff about transfer agents and real world assets, and I'll send it around, and we can build off of this amazing discussion where mostly people are scribbling in notebooks, and we can expand on these ideas. But there are a lot of opportunities for us to work together and connect with you all, okay, as a transfer agent. We don't like being called that because it's kind of boring. But there's a lot of great opportunities. So the challenges really come down to, in our industry, is a shared understanding. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. Be here all week, 2 shows a night, 2 drink minimum. Take care of your bartenders and waitresses. I'm Dave Hendricks. Have a good night.
Hi, I'm Manny Pillai from otcDigital. Been building capital markets platforms for 25 years. Focus all about distribution and democratization of assets. So first of all, I thank my fellow contributors or discussion group for making it a very lively conversation. We could go on for another couple of hours, but it is very, very interesting to hear all of their viewpoints. The topics that we discussed range from UI, what kind of a distribution we are looking at, and secondary markets. And some of the interesting points mentioned here is, is RWAs are currently only sold to the top 1%. How do you make it open? Opportunities for the next 10% and beyond. What kind of distribution platforms do we need? Do we need, solutions that newer fintech platforms to provide, or existing market participants, the Schwabs and the E-Trades are going to be, ruling the world? So the answer is probably both, a mix of both. What are the barriers to the distribution? One of the biggest bottleneck we discussed was KYC and AML, and it's every platform doing KYC AML that slows down the whole process. How do we make sure that we can come to a more or less an universal standard for IDs? And I know there are several solutions being discussed, and we discussed about things from everything from Coinbase solution to other IDs and individual broker-dealers solutions. But I think we still need a way to coordinate and come up with a proper KYC and AML, streamline the process. Again, we talked about traditional channels, identities on chain. This is another interesting topic, and it's still a lot more questions than answers. Maybe this could be solved through some of the other groups which have been focusing more on asset tokenization. The next slide, please. So the solutions, we discussed from how can we broaden the distribution that comes from neobanks and fintech companies, beyond PayPal, Coinbase, and Robinhood, and there are managing. This one of the challenges is how do we, bring in 20,000 LPs? It's a very costly impact. So that's where we felt that more and more, if you're a retail investor, it's most likely that we are going to stick to a traditional brokerage platform, and from there, they would actually get the RWA distribution directly from the issuers. So, other areas are stakeholders, identity products we discussed before. One of the interesting things that came up is a travel rule in Europe where whether market participants or the trading platforms are required to exchange identity in such a way it is easy to move your assets. That's an interesting thing that maybe in the US we should definitely should be, as a regulatory rule should come on board. Another standard that's talked about is PSD2. So, this is part of the solutions. There are a lot more topics we discussed. I'm sorry, I couldn't remember those areas, but definitely I would like to thank the whole participants for their lively exchange. And, finally, I'm happy to take more questions later on.
Talking infrastructure and data service providers, aka oracles, and how they play a role in data enablement between off-chain and on-chain, specific to tokenization. So I guess if you want to kick off the slide, thank you. So how do we define this category? Similar to most of the topics here, it's quite broad, and I think paring it down into today's use cases, which primarily focuses on T-bills, right? And we've seen kind of the emergence of tokenized funds in the form of T-bills being brought on chain, and having that reporting capability accurately reflect the price of a stablecoin or asset that is backed by a T-bill fund. So oracles play a very key role in this. And just to kind of take a step back into how oracles play a role in exclusively on-chain or DeFi environments, they are the information messengers between smart contracts and data sources. Because smart contracts can't access data from other environments. So they can't query an exchange like Coinbase or Kraken or Uniswap on their own. They need these middleware pieces or tools or messengers called oracles to provide that data. So simple things like, what is the price of ETHUSD? I need to know that because I have a lending protocol, and I need to know when to liquidate a position based on price. So oracles do this pretty well and have been doing that pretty well in the DeFi space for many years. Coincidentally, people often refer to the topic of the oracle problem in DeFi because there is such a external dependency on oracles to provide critical price information to smart contracts to enable them to work. And if those prices are incorrect, it could be quite catastrophic for that protocol and the protocol users. So now when we think about bringing assets who are not native in origin on chain in the scale of trillions, it becomes even more of a big responsibility, and you could even say oracle problem, in that this external dependency on reporting price information accurately from on-chain to or off-chain to on-chain is critical and necessary for functionality, but there is a lot of risk. So how we're thinking about this, again, let's look through the lens of a T-bill. Most T-bills are housed within a custodian or a NAV fund administrator. So that is ultimately one data source, which is actually the problem. So what makes a healthy and robust oracle is having a data model that includes many data sources. So again, thinking about on-chain, data sources include exchanges like Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, and DEXs, and we have plenty of them to include in a data model. Off-chain, when we're looking at just a custodian or a NAV fund administrator, that's one source. So we're now in this very centralized, limited sourcing situation. And so can an oracle in itself change that? No, we can't do that, right? We can't change where that origin and housing takes place. But what we are enabling is a improvement on the don't just trust me that it's X amount in this custodian or NAV fund administrator as the kind of operators of those two places. It's, okay, now we have a third-party neutral operator in the form of an oracle that is also having a look in to see, yep, I see that's $100 sitting in there. And now from that value, we can reflect that in a token on-chain, and trading on-chain can take place in a verifiable and resilient manner. So the key problem or the key challenge our group kind of talked about was this issue of centralization. We're really limited to what off-chain origins are being utilized. So we also talked about who are we ultimately serving, right? And I think that's a really important question because the solution should be geared toward who you're trying to help. And so in our opinions, those categories of customers are the investors, people who are investing in, let's say, this T-bill, or liquidity providers, and ultimate token holders. So once this, let's say a stablecoin backed by a T-bill is circulating on chain and there's a Morpho vault that it can be used to borrow another asset against, we want to make sure that the holders of that stablecoin, the protocol who has listed that stablecoin, is getting accurate pricing information, and that's being piped back from off-chain into this one centralized hub. So I guess we could go to the next slide. So those are kind of the key challenges, and thinking about who we're trying to help. What we want to see, and what is currently a step forward, is working directly with these token issuers, the custodians that they have partnered with, and the kind of API interfaces that have been made available typically by a combination of those 2 or 3 parties. And introducing this third-party attester to say, here is the value, and now we can add this on-chain. So is there one more slide? I feel like we missed a piece here. Yeah, so that's kind of where our solutions reside when we're talking about T-bills. It does get a little bit more complicated, as do all things with oracles and DeFi and on-chain tooling, when you start to get outside the scope of a T-bill, right? Which is pretty straightforward. When we're talking about private markets and more esoteric financial instruments that don't even have these like universally held origins of custody, it becomes much more difficult to ascertain where that value is, understanding if that value is being reported correctly in the first place, and then kind of passing through that information through, let's say, tooling like API interfaces, while maintaining privacy, which can be critically important in some of these asset classes, that allows for the token to actually be used once it lands on chain. So some of the ideas we talked about for these kind of like non-vanilla and easier financial instruments is utilizing zero-knowledge technology, where you can preserve the privacy of the information that's backing these assets. You can permission who is allowed to trade them or have access to them, and those types of features can ultimately be configured within the Oracle. Again, this is not stuff that's like super easy to do, and I won't lie and say Chronicle has the solution today, but that is the future state of that. AI can also be helpful potentially in removing the human error of reporting or kind of malicious actions of manipulating data off-chain. And ultimately, I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it's like really an optimistic place to be standing on, where considering what happened with the 2008 financial crisis, and that being ultimately a crisis of lack of transparency, we are moving forward in a way where having these third-party neutral attesters is stepping up the transparency quotient quite considerably, and I think there's a lot more to go. So we left feeling optimistic, I would say. And that's it.
All right, thank you all for all the great discussions. It seems like 20 minutes or 25 minutes or 30 seconds, whatever the different groups had was definitely not enough. We could have talked for hours. So some key themes I heard across the board, right? What was interesting, every group's challenges were challenges, frankly, that could be addressed by another group. So we heard on the asset issuer side, right? I think Kher kicked off and joked and said if everyone else in there solves their problems, we'd have a load of asset and security issuers willing to issue assets on chain. We talked about distribution and the distributors needing data to provide AML and KYC. We talked about the transfer agencies and the tokenization engines needing better UI, UX standards, guidance from the industry, guidance from regulators. And so really, you could see there's this really interconnectedness across all the groups, across all the challenges, and many of the opportunities that many of you highlighted across the board were opportunities, frankly, to support liquidity or support asset issuance and really supporting each other across the ecosystem. I think hopefully everyone saw through the debrief, through the discussions, really the interconnected need to bring the different groups together, the different working groups together to really scale this. I want to thank the facilitators, Dave, Jen, Jeroen, Manny, and Kher for facilitating the discussions. Also thank the note takers. And one thing I would leave everybody with, right, coming out of this discussion, it seemed like there was two paths with the opportunities, and one path was really around growing RWAs for the DeFi community, and another was around growing RWAs for traditional investors or TradFi. And so the question I would leave you all as you continue your discussions, continue your time at the conference, and take away to really think through is, does each community need each other to support growth in the RWA space? Can they be done in parallel? Will they take different paths? What's the connectivity between the TradFi and the DeFi community? Is there a connectivity needed between two groups to really grow RWAs and financial services and drive these at scale? So thank you all for your time. Appreciate everyone's discussion and happy to take conversations and questions in the hall afterwards.